Nogai Kath. Behind the Prison. Translated by J. Rubin. My dearest Excellency, thank you for your letter. I have been back in Japan for nearly 5 months. I was in the West, as you know, but I was unable to find any fixed employment or to earn academic credentials during my time there. All I brought home with me was my collection of concert, opera, and theater programs, as well as my photographs and nude paintings of female entertainers. I am a full 30 years old now, but, far from being prepared to start my own family, I continue to while away my days in a single room on my father's estate, which is located behind the prison in Ichigaya. It has a rather imposing gate and a lush growth of tall trees. I'm sure you could find it easily just by asking for my father. I will probably be here, doing nothing, for the time being. Indeed, I may have to spend the rest of my life like this. Not that I am surprised to find myself in this situation. The question of what I should do once I return to Japan is the same old one that continued to trouble me even while I was lost in music or intoxicated by the lips of a lover, or gazing at the Seine in the evening from the shelter of spring leaves. I confess it was my inability to solve this painful problem, and not any irrepressible longing for art, that enabled a weakling like me to bear the loneliness of living abroad for such a long time. In a foreign country, so long as one's health is unimpaired, one need have no fear of starving. One can abandon all concern for reputation and answer newspaper advertisements to become a waiter, a shop assistant, anything at all. Without the hypocritical label of gentleman, one no longer feels the shameful need to deceive others. One gains opportunities to observe the hidden truths of society and to touch the genuine tears of life. Oh, but once one has returned to the land of one's birth, there is no place more constricting. One's surroundings no longer permit such freedom, and one can no longer simply transcend the demands of social position. Like a skiff on a fog-shrouded ocean, I had no clear way ahead of me, no plans for the future when I landed in the port of Kobe with its low shingled houses and its monstrously twisted black pines. Perhaps I could stay there in hiding, I thought, rather than return to Tokyo where so many people knew me. At that very moment, a heartfelt cry reached my ears, the deep, strong voice of someone ascending the crowded gangplank. Welcome back, brother. And who should appear before me, dressed in a university student uniform, but my very own younger brother. I had naturally lost touch with my father, especially during the past 2 or 3 years, but, greatly worried, he had contacted the steamship company, learned which vessel I had boarded and sent my brother to meet the ship. Shamed by the extent of my father's efforts, I felt an instinctive urge to hide my face. At the same time, I was sick of parental affection. Why did my parents not simply turn their backs on a son who had proved himself so unfilial? And why did that son feel so threatened by his sense of gratitude toward his parents? Why, when he tried to force himself not to feel such gratitude, did he succeed only in filling himself with pain and dread? No, nothing in this world is as oppressive and debilitating as blood ties. Any other relationship, be it with friend, lover, wife, be it obligatory or constraining or difficult, is something one has consciously entered into at some point. Only one's ties with parents and siblings are formed at birth and are unbreakable. And even if one succeeds in severing such relationships, all one is left with is the unbearable agony of conscience. It is simply one's destiny. Your Excellency, I am certain you have seen sparrows that have built nests in the eaves of your home. No sooner do the young fly away from the nest than they escape forever from this fateful shadow. Nor do the parents make any attempt to bind their offspring's hearts with morality. One glance at my brother, born of the same blood, his face so resembling my own, was all it took to fill me with an indescribably cruel emotion. In an instant, it seemed to sweep away the inexpressible nostalgia I felt, along with the sorrow, the joy, the vivid sense of freedom of my wandering years, leaving nothing behind. Suddenly the air enveloping me seemed to grow still, as might be imagined in a medieval monastery, cold as ice and clear as a mirror. The 6 o'clock is an express train, my brother said. Let's buy our tickets. I said nothing in reply. At Kobe Station all I did was stare at a few unrefined but voluptuous American girls buying bouquets from a flower vendor. After arriving at Shinbashi Station the next morning, I found myself being whisked by rickshaw to my father's estate behind the Ichigaya prison. They held a little banquet for me at home that evening. My father turned 60 this year. He probably felt he had to give the party to keep up appearances regarding his son and heir, whatever the truth of the situation. They put me in the seat of honor before the tokonoma where a calligraphic scroll hung inscribed with a long string of Chinese characters that meant nothing to me. Sitting at the other end of the table were my mother and father. To my right was the brother who had been adopted into my mother's family to carry it on as pastor of a small church. To my left was my parents' youngest child, the brother who had met my ship, sitting there in his impressive uniform, its gold buttons gleaming. There were flecks of grey in my father's moustache, but his tanned face was more radiant than ever, and the added years only seemed to increase the youthfulness of his robust frame. My mother, by contrast, looked as though she had aged 10 or 20 years during my absence. Now she was just a shriveled up little old lady I could hardly recognize. I would want a wife or lover and, I dare say, my mother to remain eternally young and beautiful. When I saw her looking so aged, I could hardly lift my chopsticks to join in the feasting. Sorrow, pity, and a mix of even stronger emotions struck me all at once. An intense desire to revolt against the fate that dooms us to perish. Your Excellency, my mother was a young woman until I left for the West. People who didn't know us very well used to ask if she was my sister. She was born in Old Edo and raised to be a great lover of the kabuki theater, a skilled singer of Nagota ballads while accompanying herself on the shamisen. She also played the koto. Approaching 40, she could still sing that wonderful passage from Azuma Hake with ease, the shamisen tuned up to the high ropon scale, pine needle pins in her hair. She makes her way along the dewy cobblestones beside the Sumida River, writing brush in its case wet with ink, and yet she was very restrained in her tastes. As far back as her teenage years she is said to have hated the color red, and I never saw an underkimono of hers that could be described as gaudy, even when the family's clothing was spread out to dry at the height of summer. Perhaps a muted persimmon-colored grid pattern, or a pale blue isn't print of plovers against white-capped waves. I'll never forget all the theaters she took me to in the arms of my wet nurse, the Hisamatsuzie, the Shintomizie, the Chaitosie, where we would indulge in a rare treat of broiled eel on rice in our box seats. And those marvelous winter days in the warmth of the kotatsu, where she would spread out her colorful woodblock prints of such legendary actors as Hikosa and Tanasuke and tell me all about the old days in the theater. Oh, the cruelty of time that destroys all things. If only I could stay forever and ever with my mother, Your Excellency, enjoying those magnificent pastimes. For her I would gladly ferry across the Sumida on the coldest winter day to buy her those sakura mochi sweets from Old Edo that she loved so much. But medicine. That is another matter. Not even on the warmest day would I want to go buy her medicine. Never have I had it in me to surrender to those ancient articles of faith which mankind has been commanded to follow. Such precepts are too cruel, too cold. Rather than bow before them, how often have I cried out in anguish, wishing that I and the precepts could be united in a perfect, warm embrace. But having despaired of such an easy resolution, I determined that I would confront them head-on, that I would do battle with heaven's retribution. My father is a stern disciplinarian, a diligent man, a fierce enemy of all that is evil. The day after I came home, he quietly asked me about my plans for the future. He wanted to know how I intended to preserve my honor as a man, to fulfill my duty as a citizen of the empire. Should I become a language teacher? No, I could never presume to present myself as a teacher of French. Any Frenchman would know the language far better than I could ever hope to. Should I become a newspaper reporter? No, I can imagine myself becoming a thief someday, but I am not so inured to vice that I would treat justice and morality as merchandise the way such people do. The scandal sheets Hirozu Sujich and Noroku Shimp present themselves as paragons of virtue, but any society reformed by them would be far darker than a society left wholly unreformed. I worry too much about this to sink to their level. Should I become a magazine reporter? No, I am not losing sleep over social progress or human happiness to the point where I would stand up as an advocate for good causes. Nor am I the least bit bothered, as some journalists seem to be, by the cannibalistic, incestuous lives of animals. Should I become an artist? No, this is Japan, not the West. Far from demanding art, Japanese society looks upon it as a nuisance. The state has established a system of education by intimidation and forces us to produce grotesque vocalizations that no member of the Yamato race has ever pronounced. T, B, D, F. And if you can't say them you have no right to exist in Meiji society. They do this primarily so that someday we will invent a new torpedo or gun, certainly not to have us intone the poems of Verlaine or Mallarmé, and still less to have us sing the Marseillaise or the International, with their messages of revolution and pacifism. Those of us with a deep-seated desire to devote ourselves to the Muses or to Venus must leave this fatherland of ours with all its stringent rules before we can begin to embrace our harps. This would be of the greatest benefit both to the nation and to art itself. No, there is not a single profession in this world that will keep me alive for the days that remain to me. Should I become a rickshaw puller wandering the streets of the city? No, I have too great a sense of responsibility for that. Could I safely fulfill the demands of the profession by delivering my passengers uninjured to their destinations? And what if I became a manservant cooking rice? Mixed in with the countless grains, might there not be an invisible chip of stone that would tear my master's stomach, endangering his life? The more precise and subtle a human being's awareness, the less he can presume to take on any profession, however humble. First he must starve, he must freeze, he must numb the precision of his mind, he must be blinded by his own selfish desires. At the very least, he must ignore the teachings of the ancient sages. Oh, you who sing of how hard it is to make a living, how I envy you. I turned to my father and said, there is nothing for me to do in this world. Please think of me as mad or crippled, and do not press me to live up to normal worldly expectations. For his part, my father would have found it a stain on the family honor were his son to become known as a reporter or a clerk or a servant or some other lowly worker. Fortunately we have a spare room, he said, and food. You can just live here quietly and keep to yourself. With that, he brought the discussion to a close. These past few months, I have spent one blank day after another gazing out at the garden. The hot August sunlight casts the shadows of the luxuriant trees over the garden's broad expanse of green moss. Here and there patches of light break through the trees' black shadows, trembling with each passing breeze. I find the sight inexpressibly beautiful. A cicada cries. A crow caws. And yet the world, exhausted by the scorching heat, is as hushed as at night. A sudden shower strikes, but because the larger part of the sky remains blue and clear, I can see each thick thread of rain falling in the bright light. Each of the plants responds differently to the downpour, the delicate ones bowing to earth, the stronger ones springing upwards, the sound of the raindrops striking them varying from light to heavy depending on the thickness of their leaves. The shower symphony rises to a great crescendo with the rumbling bass drum of thunder that rolls through, to be followed by the gentle moderato of the green frog's flutes and a final hush as sudden as the piece is opening. Then the entire garden, from the tiniest tree branches soaring aloft to the leaf tips of the kumazasu bamboo creeping among the ornamental boulders, is strung with crystalline jewels that lend a startling radiance to the mossy carpet, across which the massed trees' long, diagonal, cloud-like shadows drift until the evening cicadas call and twilight arrives. Around the time a wind chime begins ringing incessantly and the servants light our paper lanterns, from the street beyond the front gate comes the light clip-clop of wooden clogs and the laughter of young women. A student ambles along, chanting a poem, a harmonica sounds, and somewhere far away the pop of what must be fireworks. A street musician passes by, lamenting another broken heart to the twang of a shamisen. The night deepens. The insect cries grow louder with each passing day. When I lie down to sleep at night, a terrifying din travels from the closed-off garden all the way to the space beneath the veranda outside my room. What power rules these tens of thousands of creatures? What makes them all unite in one voice to besiege me like this? I feel as if I am camped alone on a magnificent plain beneath an endless sky, waiting in eternity for the dawn to break. But when I open my eyes, the dim lamp on my desk reveals that I am actually lying beneath a low-board ceiling that might come crashing down at any moment. My body confined by suffocating colorless walls and blank sliding paper doors. Then a keen sense of the nature of life in Japan overwhelms me, so limited, so lacking in depth. The sudden clatter of raindrops against the ceiling sounds like someone trying to play a broken koto. I hear the night wind tearing through the trees above. But the sound lacks the depth of a lion's roaring in a dark valley, and I wonder if what I hear is the rustling of reeds on the shoreline of a great river flowing through a tropical plain. The insects cry without cease. They cry even after the break of dawn and the arrival of noon. And that is not all I hear. The rains fall day after day. What a humid climate we have. I try closing all the shoji and lighting the charcoal brazier in the corner of the room, but my kimono is still so moist I can't help wondering if my skin will grow scales like some fishy creatures. The fine leather binding of the Diary of Countess Krasinska, given to me as a keepsake by Rosalind when I left America, has been all but destroyed by mold. The lacquer shoes in which I danced with Yvonne in a Parisian ballroom have grown a ghostly white fur. Cruel stains have formed on the summer topcoat I spread on the grass when lying there with Helene in the Bois de Boulogne. I hear the sad calls of vendors wandering through the neighborhood and the clatter of shutters being closed nearby as night falls. Oh, the nights in Japan. No words can describe their darkness. Darker than death, darker than the grave, cold, lonely. Shall I call it a wall of darkness, an indestructible barrier that cannot be pierced by any blade of rage or despair, that cannot be scorched by any flame of rancor or frenzy? I sit beneath the only spot of light in the whole room, a single oil lamp, reading and rereading the letters I exchanged with the people I knew in those days of joy, unable to read a letter to the end before having to press my face, in tears, against its pages. The cries of the insects fill the garden. Eventually, however, it dawns on me that the intense cries of the insects have begun slowly to fade with the passing of each dark and lonely night. I find myself wearing a new padded haori over my lined kimono, the smell of the freshly dyed cloth oddly sickening to inhale. The rains have ceased. In contrast to the morning and evening chill, the sunny afternoons are frighteningly hot. The leaves have turned yellow, but how strange to watch them as they flutter down through the windless air onto the garden's mossy carpet in the harsh, summer-like sunlight. I feel the deep melancholy of the French poet who sang of the South American climate. Hear the leaves scatter in the April spring. I go out to the garden one afternoon, a partially read book of poems in hand, and walk among the beds. The streaming rays illuminate each overlapping leaf of the plums, the maples, the other trees that grow in such profusion, casting their shadows like patterns on the mossy ground. Deep in this shade stands a gazebo. Beyond it is an unobstructed view of a flowering field. I sit to take in the immense blue sky at a glance. Thin white clouds spread across the blue from west to east as if painted with a brush, never moving however long I gaze at them. Countless dragonflies flit back and forth like the swallows one sees high in the summer skies of France. Multicolored cosmos, taller than the gazebo, bloom in profusion beneath the harsh sun, spreading to all corners of the field, each of which is densely covered in low-growing kumazasu bamboo. Crimson amaranths seem to burst into flame. The Chinese bellflowers and asters retain their brilliant purple, but the white-flowered bush clovers are already past their peak and bow to the ground like the disheveled tresses of a woman who has thrown herself down in tears, flowing towards my feet upon the gazebo's paving stones. In their dewy shadows, one or two surviving insects cry out in thin melodic strains. Ah, this blue sky, this sunlight, mementos of a forgotten summer. How could one imagine it to be October, to be autumn? The barest hint of a breeze turns the pages of the poetry book on my knees until I have a clear view of the final stanza of Baudelaire's sad soul of autumn. Ah, laissez-moi, mon front pose sur vos genoux. Gaucha, en regressant elite blanket torride. De Elaria saison le reine journée du. Ah, let me, with my head bowed on your knees, taste the sweet, yellow rays of the end of autumn, while I mourn for the white, torrid summer one. No matter what I see, even the most beautiful flower, I wonder if it is blooming only to make us think of the sadness to come when it has withered and died. Mori Gai. The Last Testament of Okitsu Yagoman. Translated by Richard Bowring. My ritual suicide today one will no doubt come as a great shock, and there will be those who claim that I, Yagoman, am either senile or deranged. But this is very far from the truth. Ever since my retirement I have been living in a hut of the simplest kind that I built at the western foot of Mount Funaoka here in the province of Yamashiro. After the demise of my former master, Lord Shikya, the rest of my family moved from the castle town of Yatsushiro in the province of Higo too, and are now living in Kumamoto in the same province. They will be very shaken when this testament reaches them from so far away. Nevertheless, I request that one of my neighbors send it to them at the first opportunity. I have for some years now lived the life of a Buddhist monk, but I composed this last testament because at heart I am still a warrior and thus deeply concerned about my posthumous reputation. My hut is of so wretched an appearance that those who find me may even suppose that I committed suicide because of debts I could not pay before the end of the year. But I leave no debts. Nor do I propose to put anyone to the slightest expense on my behalf. In a box in the wall cupboard by the side of the tokonoma is some money that I have saved. Although it is but a trifle, I request most earnestly that it be used to pay for my cremation. I should deem myself most fortunate if you would also send a little keepsake with this note to those relatives in Kumamoto whom I have just mentioned. Just a fingernail, perhaps, for I have shaved my head quite bare. The 3 wooden memorial tablets which are standing in the tokonoma are for the 3 men I have served. My former master Hosokawa Tadaroki, Lord of Etch, known as Lord Asawai Sansai and in death as Lord Shikya, Hosokawa Tadatoshi, Lord of Etch, known in death as Lord My Kingdom, and Hosokawa Mitsuhisa, Lord of Higo. I request that care be taken to burn the tablets in cleansing holy fire so that they may not be subjected to any disrespectful treatment. I end my life today, the 2nd day of the 12th month of the 1st year of Manji, 1658, since it corresponds to the 13th anniversary of the death of Lord Shikya, who passed away on the 2nd day of the 12th month of the 2nd year of SH, 1645. As I wish the reason for my death to be understood by my descendants, I leave the following account. It happened a full 30 years ago. In the 5th month of the 1st year of Kani I, 1624, a ship from Annam arrived at Nagasaki. Lord Shikya had retired as a monk 3 years earlier. He gave me orders to purchase a rare article that he would be able to use in the tea ceremony, and so I set out for Nagasaki with a colleague. As luck would have it, a large tree of rare aloes would have been imported. It was, however, in 2 parts, the bowl and the upper branches, and a retainer who had been sent all the way from Sendai by Lord Date Gonschlagen decided he must have the bowl. I too had my eye on the same piece of wood, and so we bid against each other and gradually forced the price up. At this point my colleague said that even if it were our master's orders, incense wood was a useless plaything and we would be wrong to throw away a vast amount of money on it. He would prefer us to let the date have the bowl and ourselves to buy the upper branches. I could not agree, I told him. My master's orders were to go and buy a rare article, and the finest thing among these imported goods was undoubtedly this aloes wood. Of the 2 parts, the bowl was obviously the rarest of the rare. Only by buying the bowl would we be carrying out our master's orders. To give in to the overweening pride of the date and let them take the bowl would be to bring the name of Hosokawa into disrepute. My colleague laughed at me and said I was making far too much of this. If it were a question of whether we should give up or occupy a whole province or a castle, then of course we should fight the date to the bitter end. But was this not just a piece of wood to be burnt in a brazier for the tea ceremony? To think of spending so much money on it was absurd. Were our master himself to bid for it, we as his retainers should actively try to dissuade him. Even if he had set his heart on getting the bowl, to let him accomplish his desire would be nothing less than an act of gross flattery. I was not yet 30 at the time and took offense at what he said, but managed to hold myself in check. His words sounded very wise, I told him, but my overriding concern was for the orders and requests of my master. If he ordered me to capture a castle, I would do so though it had walls of steel. If he ordered me to behead a man, I would do so though he were a devil. He had given me orders to buy something rare, and so I was duty-bound to search for something unique. It was not for me to question or criticize my master's orders, provided they were not contrary to moral principles. He ridiculed me all the more. I was right, he said. Had I not just declared that one should not do anything contrary to moral principles? If we were dealing with military equipment, he would not have minded spending an enormous sum of money, but to pay a price out of all proportion to the value of the wood was a sign of youthful imprudence, he said. I knew the difference between military equipment and incense despite my age, I retorted. When Lord Taeshinden was head of the family, Lord Gam said that he had heard the Hosokawa possessed many excellent implements and would like to come and see for himself. The appointed day arrived. When Lord Gam appeared, Lord Taeshinden brought out swords, bows, spears, and various kinds of armor to show him. Lord Gam was somewhat surprised, but looked them over and then said he had really come to see the tea utensils. Lord Taeshinden laughed. Lord Gam had talked of implements, so he had shown him the kind of thing military families were usually known for, but if it was tea utensils he wanted to see, then he did happen to have a few of those as well. Only then did he bring them out. Could there be another such family in Japan which had devoted itself to military matters for generations and yet was also highly skilled in such arts as poetry and the tea ceremony? If one were to claim that the tea ceremony was a useless formality, then so were grand ceremonies of state and festivals in honor of one's ancestors. The order we had received this time was to buy a rare article for use in the tea ceremony, nothing more. This was our master's order and so we must carry it out even at the cost of our lives. Because my colleague had no feeling for the art of tea, he obstinately considered it unreasonable for our master to spend a great sum of money on incense, I replied. He did not wait for me to finish. Of course I know nothing of the tea ceremony. Of course I am a stubborn warrior. If you are so skilled in a variety of arts, let's see your main accomplishment, he said, jumping up. There in the inn he seized his sword from the rack in the tokonoma and swung at me out of the blue. My sword was hanging in the rack under the double shelves of the tokonoma, and as there was nothing else near at hand I parried his blow with a bronze vase that held a seasonal arrangement of lilies. Jumping aside, I reached for my sword, whipped it out and cut him down with a single stroke. Without further ado, I purchased the bowl of the aloes wood and brought it back to the castle at Kitsuki. The retainer from the Date clan had no choice but to buy the upper branches and take them to Sendai. Presenting the wood to Lord Shikya, I requested permission to commit seppuku. I had placed great store by my master's orders, I said, but in the process I had killed a samurai of whom he had need. He listened to my story and then told me he felt everything I had said was entirely understandable and that even if the wood turned out not to be valuable, there was no doubt it was the rare article he had ordered me to go and buy. I was therefore right to have felt the matter important. If we looked at everything with an eye to its utility, there would be nothing left to value in the world, he said. What is more, he immediately kindled a piece of the wood that I had brought back. It was of rare quality and he named it Hatsune, or first song. From the ancient verse each time we hear the cuckoo cry it sounds so new, always singing its first song. He was full of praise that I had returned with an article of such quality. But the descendants of the man I had killed must not harbor any ill will, he said. He immediately ordered my colleague's son to appear, had Sake brought out before us and made us swear that no grudge would be held on either side. 2 years later, on the 6th day of the 9th month of the 3rd year of Kani-I, 1626, when the emperor went in progress to the castle at Nij, he asked Mai Jinden for some of this fine incense and it was presented to him. The emperor was well pleased and I heard that he called it Shiragiku, white chrysanthemum, from the ancient verse who can claim its match. A white chrysanthemum blooming after the autumn colors are gone. The wood that I had brought had been graciously praised by the emperor himself and had become the pride of the family. I wept at such unexpected good fortune. Having already decided to commit seppuku, however, I was secretly waiting for the proper time. Meanwhile, I was given special favors not only by Lord Shikya, who was in retirement, but also by the then head of the family, Lord Mai Jinden. In the 9th year of Kani-I, 1632, on the occasion of our transfer to another domain, I became a guard at Yatsushiro Castle, where Lord Shikya was in residence. I was also ordered to accompany him to the capital. Thus, busy with many arduous duties, I saw the days and months pass by to no purpose. Then, in the 14th year of Kani-I, 1637, came the campaign against Shimabara and I requested leave from Lord Shikya that I might fight as a bannerman under his son. It was my intention to die in battle, but our lord's military prowess was such that the rebel leader, Amakusa Shah Tokisada, was killed, and even insignificant servants such as myself were given rewards. So I lived on for many years, my long-cherished desire as yet unfulfilled. However, in the 18th year of Kani-I, 1641, Lord Mai Jinden unexpectedly fell ill and died before his father. The Lord of Higo became head of the family. Then, in the 2nd year of SHH, 1645, Lord Shikya too passed away. Prior to this, in the 13th year of Kani-I, 1636, Lord Shinagan of Sendai, who had prized the same incense wood we had divided, also died in his castle at Wakabayashi. The incense from the upper branches he had called Shibafune, firewood boat, from the verse scorched by longing. I am a boat of firewood, loaded with the cares of the world, rowed on but only to be burnt, and he had kept it as a treasured possession. Then, in the second year of Kian, 1649, the Lord of Higo suddenly passed away at the age of 31. On his deathbed he worried that his son, Lord Rokumaru, might be too young to control so large a domain, and so he informed the shogun that he wished to return the domain to the shogun's direct rule. The shogun, however, remembering the family's loyalty since the days of Lord Teishinden, ordered that the 7-year-old Lord Rokumaru be confirmed as his successor. I then requested that I might retire. I left Kumamoto and came here. But I still felt concern for Lord Rokumaru and, although I was not present, wished to pray for him that he might rule in peace, at least until he came of age. Thus, despite my intentions, I lived on for yet more years. Then, in the second year of SH, 1653, Lord Rokumaru at the young age of 11 became Lord of Etch. He was given the name Tsunetoshi and enjoyed the favor of the shogun. I was delighted to receive this news. Now I no longer had anything weighing on my mind, and yet I felt it would be a pity for me simply to die of old age. I waited for this day, the 13th anniversary of the death of Lord Shikya, from whom I received so many favors and whom I now wish to follow after all these years. I know very well that to follow one's master into death is prohibited, but I do not expect to incur censure. I did kill my companion in my youth and should have committed suicide many years ago. I have no friends I see regularly, but I have recently been on close terms with the monk Seigan from Daitokuji. I request most earnestly that my neighbors here show him this letter before sending it on to my home province. I have been writing this note by the light of a candle which has just gone out, but there is no need to light another. There is sufficient reflection from the snow at the window to enable me to cut across my wrinkled belly. The second day of the 12th month of the first year of Manji. Okitsuya Gomen, his signature. Enchi Fumiko. A bond for 2 lifetimes, gleanings. Translated by Phyllis Birnbaum. Kneeling on the veranda, I called out through the patched and faded sliding door, "May I come in, Professor?" From within came a muffled grunt that could have meant either yes or no and the sound of shifting bedclothes. This was his usual answer. I softly slid open the door and went in, still wearing my overcoat. As I had anticipated, Professor Nunokawa was lifting his rumpled head of white hair from his grimy pillow and groping for the large, thin book that lay at his side. Every time I came to take notes for him, I was bothered by the dirty fuzz on the course sheets and the strip of white fabric attached to the quilt's border. The maid Minako, who looked after the professor, seemed to let many days go by without changing the linen. Even a young person in a fetid sickbed would look quite miserable. An old man lying in such a state seemed even more appalling. My vague sense of pity for him had at some point changed into a genuine feeling of disgust for this wretchedness. The feeling grew with each breath I took of the sickroom's moldy smell, but I gently inquired after the professor's health as I spread my notebook on the desk by the bed. Minako had evidently made preparations for my visit by setting the faded old rosewood desk there before she went out to shop. The professor had a hot water bottle in his bed. The few pieces of charcoal in the small china brazier were forever going out, and the room became bitingly cold on days like today when the early winter rains might mix with snow. Following the suggestion the professor had made during our first session, I kept my coat on and sat through each meeting still dressed for the outdoors. Today we're going to do a bond for 2 lifetimes, aren't we? The professor obviously didn't want to discuss his illness. He lay back and opened the thin book on his chest. A red pencil in his right hand, he looked at me by moving only his eyes behind his thick-rimmed spectacles. On the desk, I opened the same version of Tales of Spring Rain that the professor was holding. A bond for 2 lifetimes. From the beginning on page 59, I said. The professor was doing modern colloquial versions of Ueda Akinari's Tales of Moonlight and Rain and Tales of Spring Rain, one which would become a volume in a series of Edo literary masterpieces put out by the publishing company I worked for. I had undertaken to act as secretary for Professor Nunokawa, my former teacher. As he dictated, he was too sick to write by himself. Despite his illness, he worked on this colloquial translation with much enthusiasm, partly because he needed the money. I had finished recording the 9 Gothic tales from Tales of Moonlight and Rain and the first 4 stories in Tales of Spring Rain, all dictated by the toothless professor through slackened lips, narrating slowly but almost without pause, like a silkworm spitting out thread. In Tales of Spring Rain, a work of Akinari's later years, the preface states, "How many days now have the spring rains brought this pleasing quiet?" As always, I take up my writing brush and inkstone, and let my thoughts wander here and there, but I find nothing to write about. Copying the old-fashioned storytelling styles is a job for the amateur writer, but, living like a mountain rustic, what tales can I tell? I have been deceived into believing the things people have written about the past and the present, and, not realizing they were lies, have related these tales to others, thus deceiving them as well. Oh, well, perhaps it can't be helped. There will always be people who continue to tell false stories and pass them off as classics. So I might as well go on telling my tales while the spring rains fall. When he says that copying the old-fashioned storytelling styles is a job for the amateur writer, the old author seems to dismiss the skillfully wrought style of his earlier Tales of Moonlight and Rain. Still, he continued to record his dark and unwieldy inner passions boldly and without restraint, employing historical personages, legends, and popular tales. Many stories in Tales of Spring Rain diverge from accepted feudal morality, so, of course, the work did not become as popular as Tales of Moonlight and Rain, and not many copies were handed down through the generations even in handwritten form. Akinari passed his later years without his wife, who had died at an advanced age, and he had no children. In addition, he could no longer see out of his left eye. For a considerable period, he lived in a faintly illumined world, troubled by problems of food, clothing, and shelter. Professor Nunokawa had established a reputation as a scholar of Edo literature. His oldest son had died during the war, and his wife had also passed away. His only daughter, who was married, hardly ever came to see him because of his uncompromising character and because she disliked having Minako there. All that the professor had helping support him in his old age, without either pension or annuity, were a few of his old students who enabled him to continue revising manuscripts and doing this kind of scholarly dictation. I had not noticed as much while he was translating Tales of Moonlight and Rain, but by the time we got to Tales of Spring Rain, I was often struck by the similarity of Akinari's last years and Professor Nunokawa's present life. The professor's dictation often sounded as if it were seeping out quite spontaneously from an essential source at the very depths of his being. The professor put the book on his chest and began to speak slowly in the low voice people used to commence recitations of Buddhist prayers. One autumn in Yomashiro province, all the leaves had fallen from the tall Zelkova trees. The strong, cold wind blew down over the mountain village, making for an exceedingly lonely scene. There was a rich landowner whose family had lived in Kosobe village for many years. They owned extensive paddy fields in the mountains and lived in such comfort that, through harvests both good and bad, the family never had to worry. Thus the master of the house quite naturally whiled away his time reading books and made no effort to seek friends among the village people. Every day until late at night, he read books beneath his lamp. His mother would worry about this. "Shouldn't you be going to bed soon? Hasn't the temple bell already struck 12? Father always used to say that if you stay up late at night reading books, you will wear yourself out and end up ill." When people enjoy doing something, they tend to immerse themselves completely in their own entertainments without being aware of what's happening. Then they regret it later. She thus offered him her views on the subject. He took her warning as a sign of motherly affection and, feeling grateful to her, resolved to be in bed after the clock struck 10. One night a gentle rain was falling, and amid the stillness that had settled in from early evening, no other sound could be heard. Consequently, he became so lost in his reading that, before he knew it, much time had passed. This night he forgot his mother's warning, and when he opened the window, thinking that it might be 2 in the morning, the rain had stopped, there was no wind and the late night moon had risen. "Ah, what a quiet night it is. I should write a poem about this moment," he said and, rubbing an inkstick over the ink slab, he took up his writing brush. He put his mind to 1 or 2 poetic lines, and while inclining his head and trying to think of more, he happened to hear something like a bell ringing among the chirping of the insects, which until then he had thought to be the only sounds. Now he realized that this was not the first time he had heard the sound of this bell. Every night when he had been reading his books like this, he had heard the same noise. Strange that he should notice it only now. He stepped down into the garden, looking here and there to find the source of the ringing. Shibata Motoyuki. Cambridge Circus. Translated by J. Rubin. 30 years ago, when you were 20, you took a break from the university and lived in London for 6 months. You worked in a hotel part-time and went to a language school to improve your English. At the 6-month point, your mother needed cancer surgery, so you went home to Japan and returned to the university. You went by bus a lot while you were in London. Buses were slower than the underground. They rarely ran on schedule, and when they finally did reach your stop, 2 or 3 buses running the same route would arrive at once like beads on a string. But still, you loved sitting in the front seat upstairs in those double-decker buses, watching the city roll by. You had all the time you needed, so you would take a bus to work, take one to the language school, and go by bus everywhere to get maximum value out of your £4 a month pass. Traditional double-decker London buses had no doors in the back where passengers would enter and exit. As long as the bus was not going fast, you could get on or off even if you weren't at a bus stop. You especially enjoyed hopping off before your stop, along with all the other Londoners, when a bus was stuck in traffic. One midwinter afternoon, you were heading for the used bookshops on Charing Cross Road on your way to work when you stepped off at Cambridge Circus. The bus was rounding the curve in front of the theatre and you were pleased to think of yourself as an honest-to-goodness Londoner hopping down to the street. Just then, however, the traffic was not very backed up and the bus had not slowed down much. As soon as one foot hit the road, you lost your balance and fell headlong, rolling over 3 times in the street. Fortunately, the impact was cushioned by the, for you, rather luxurious duffel coat you had bought with your last pennies to ward off the cold, and though you had some pain in your shoulders and knees, you were pretty sure you had not caused yourself any injury. That, and your embarrassment at being stared at by passers-by, who, you could tell, were trying not to laugh, prompted you to dust yourself off and stride away towards the bookshops up the road. 30 years have gone by, my work has brought me to London, and here I am again, standing in Cambridge Circus. The curve of the road has been altered somewhat, not necessitated, I'm sure, by a spate of bus passengers rolling on the street, but the feel of the place has hardly changed. The same old double-decker buses roar past me without slowing down very much. Before my eyes, my former self stands on the open platform at the rear of a bus. I release my grip on the pole and, with a self-satisfied look on my face, I hook down right in front of the theater. I lose my balance, look down on the road and roll over 3 times. The old me tries hard to look unfazed. I stand up, dust myself off and start walking in the direction of the bookshops towards the 30 years of life to come. Hey, wait there, Shibata, don't be in such a hurry, I feel the urge to shout. Have a cup of tea somewhere nearby, and calm down. Of course, the old me can't hear such mental mutterings of a ghost from the future. He just strides away pretending he's not in any pain. But the ghost is free to imagine whatever he likes. In the ghost's imagination, you change your mind and go into the nearest cafe for a cup of tea to regain your poise. And during the 15 minutes you're in the cafe, your life changes irrevocably. By which I don't mean that you meet someone and fall in love or that the book you've been reading provides you with some enormous revelation. You just sit there sipping your tea and staring at a faded Pepsi-Cola sign while discreetly rubbing your knee. And while you're there, the ghost imagines, something inside you changes, subtly but irrevocably. 2 months later, your father writes to you about your mother's cancer, but you don't go back to Japan and you don't re-enroll at the university. 30 years later, you're still in London. It would be nice to say that you've had all kinds of exciting experiences in the meantime, but that's not what happens. The time just creeps along as you go from one odd job to another, washing dishes at hotels, cleaning buildings, working at discount shops, and when you stop to notice, 30 years have gone by. Now you're doing office chores at the language school and you pass through Cambridge Circus almost every day, but you have no special feeling for the place. Today, you happen to be standing in Cambridge Circus with nothing much in mind, happy to have some free time until you meet a friend and to feel the winter sunshine on your back. The big, red body of a double-decker bus enters your field of vision from beyond the intersection. You know that short young Japanese fellow in the brown duffel coat who is standing on the open boarding platform, clutching the pole and wearing a silly grin. He jumps down, falls over, and rolls. Then he stands up with a look of feigned detachment on his face and starts walking towards the used bookshops but changes his mind and turns to enter a cafe. Don't go in there. The ghost from the future silently shouts now that he knows the irreversible change that will happen during those 15 minutes inside. His imagination tells him. The young man changes his mind again, does not go into the cafe and starts walking towards the used bookshop, towards a different life. That young man 30 years later, it seems, will turn out to be me. My work has brought me to London today and I'm standing in Cambridge Circus, where I've arranged to meet an old friend from my college days who lives in London now. It's summer, everyone is wearing short-sleeved shirts, and the double-decker buses are running as always, but I don't have to worry about spotting a short Japanese fellow in a duffel coat. There's no fear today of my becoming anyone's future ghost. I live in the real world, teach at a real university and translate contemporary American literature on the side. I have a wife and friends and colleagues and students. I'm me now, just me myself. Well, I guess you're free to think that, someone says. Everybody has the right to think they are themselves, and your right to think such a thought is not significantly less than anyone else's. But aren't you forgetting one thing? That on that day 30 years ago, when you jumped down from the bus and fell, rolling over 4 times in the street, the next bus in the string came along? Hoshi Shinichi. Shoulder top secretary. Translated by J. Rubin. Gliding down the plastic paved street on his automatic roller skates, Zane glances at his watch. 4.30. Maybe I'll try one more place before I go back to the office. Zane slows his skates and stops in front of a house. Zane is a salesman. In his left hand he carries a big case full of merchandise. Perched on his right shoulder is a parrot with beautiful wings. Such parrots ride atop the shoulders of everyone in this era. He presses the doorbell and waits. Eventually the door opens and the woman of the house appears. Hi, Zane mumbles, and immediately the parrot on his shoulder begins to declaim. Madam, please be so kind as to forgive me for intruding on you at this busy time. The parrot is a robot. It is equipped with a precise electronic brain, a recorder, and a speaker, and is designed to elaborate on the mutterings of its owner in conversations. After a brief pause, the parrot on the woman's shoulder replies, "Oh, thank you very much for coming today. Please forgive me, though. My memory is so bad, I can't quite recall your name." Zane's parrot leans close to his ear and whispers, "Who are you?" she's asking. These robotic parrots also function to summarize and report the speech of the other person. "I'm from the new electro company," Zane mutters. "Buy this electric spider." The parrot then interprets with the utmost politeness. "Actually, madam, I am a sales representative of the new electro company. I believe you probably know that we as a company pride ourselves on our long tradition and reliability. I am here today to show you a new product that our research division has finally managed to perfect after many years of experimentation. It is none other than this magnificent electric spider. At this point, Zame opens his case and pulls out a small metal device that looks like a shiny golden spider. His parrot continues, and here it is. When, for example, your back becomes itchy, you slip this under your clothes. Then the spider automatically finds its way to the itchy spot and gives it a delightful scratching with these little legs. I'm sure you will agree that it is a marvelously convenient invention. I have made a special point of bringing it with me today because I am sure that an elegant household such as yours should be equipped with one. When Zame's parrot stops speaking, the parrot on the housewife's shoulder whispers into her ear too quietly for Zame to hear. He says, "Buy this automatic back scratcher." She mutters back to her parrot, "Don't want it," which her parrot expands for her as follows. "Oh, how marvelous. Your company makes one new product after another. Unfortunately, however, we simply do not have the means to outfit our home with such a superb mechanism." Zame's parrot reports to him. She says, "Don't want it." Zame mutters, "Oh, come on." His parrot proclaims with increased warmth, "But you see, madam, what a marvelously convenient product this is. It enables you to scratch where your hand is unable to reach, and it can be used in the presence of guests without their ever suspecting. Not to mention the drudgery it saves. And we have outdone ourselves in setting the price as low as possible." He says, "Please buy it." What a pain. After this exchange with its owner, the woman's parrot answers, "To tell you the truth, I never buy anything without consulting my husband. Unfortunately, he hasn't come home from work yet, and so I can't possibly make such an important decision. Perhaps I can discuss it with him tonight, and then, possibly the next time you're in the area, you might be so good as to stop by again. I would love to buy it, but it really is out of the question. I'm terribly sorry." Zame's parrot summarizes this for him. She says, "Get lost." Zame resigns himself, and as he is returning the electric spider to his case, he mutters, "So long, babe." The parrot on his shoulder announces his departure with the utmost politeness. "Oh, well, it truly is a shame. All right, then, if you don't mind, I will call on you again at some point in the near future. I am sorry for having taken up so much of your valuable time. Please give my regards to your husband." Zame steps outside. With the parrot still clinging to his shoulder, he revs up his roller skates again and goes back to the office. He is seated at his desk, adding up the day's receipts on his calculator, when the parrot on the department chief's shoulder calls out to him, "Hey, Zay." "Oh, great, another lecture," Zay mutters to himself, whereupon his parrot responds, "Right away, sir. Just let me finish straightening up here." Soon Zame is standing before the chief's desk. The chief releases a cloud of tobacco smoke, from the depths of which the parrot on his shoulder says with authority, "Now see here, Zame, these are critical times for the company. We are being called upon to make a great leap forward. I believe you know this as well as anyone. And yet, when I look at your results, I can't help feeling that you could do better. This is a deplorable situation. I want you to understand what I'm saying here. You need to buckle down." Zame's parrot whispers to him. He says, "Sell more." "Yeah," Zame mutters back, like it's so easy. His parrot meekly responds, "Yes, sir, I understand completely, and I am determined to increase my sales volume yet again. Our competitors, however, are using all kinds of new techniques. Selling is not as easy as it used to be. I will of course increase my efforts, but I would be most grateful, sir, if you would ask research and development to create more and more new products." The bell sounds the end of the workday at New Electro. Over at last. It's exhausting to run around all day like that. Gotta have a drink. Zame pushes open the door of the Galaxy, a bar he often visits on his way home. Spotting him, the landlady's parrot calls out to him in a sexy voice. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Zame. Please come in. It's been ages since I last saw you. Without a handsome man like you here, this place can be so depressing." For Zame, this is the most enjoyable part of the day. Akutagawa Rhinosuke. Hellscream. Translated by J. Rubin. 1. I am certain there has never been anyone like our great lord of Horikawa, and I doubt there ever will be another. 1 In a dream before his lordship was born, her maternal ladyship saw the awesomely armed guardian deity of the West, or so people say. In any case, his lordship seemed to have innate qualities that distinguished him from ordinary human beings. And because of this, his accomplishments never ceased to amaze us. You need only glance at his mansion in the capital's Horikawa district to sense the boldness of its conception. How shall I put it? Its grandeur, its heroic scale are beyond the reach of our mediocre minds. Some have questioned the wisdom of his lordship's undertaking such a project, comparing him to China's first emperor, whose subjects were forced to build the Great Wall, or to the Sui Emperor Yang, who made his people erect lofty palaces. But such critics might be likened to the proverbial blind men who described the elephant according only to the parts they could feel. It was never his lordship's intention to seek splendor and glory for himself alone. He was always a man of great magnanimity who shared his joys with the wider world, so to speak, and kept in mind even the lowliest of his subjects. Surely this is why he was left unscathed by his encounter with that midnight procession of goblins so often seen at the lonely intersection of Newtmere in the capital. 3. It is also why, when rumor had it that the ghost of True, Minister of the Left, was appearing night after night at the site of his ruined mansion by the river at Higoshisange, you must know it, where the minister had recreated the famous seascape of Shiogama in his garden, it took only a simple rebuke from his lordship to make the spirit vanish. 4. In the face of such resplendent majesty, no wonder all residents of the capital, old and young, men and women, revered his lordship as a reincarnation of the Buddha. One time, it is said, his lordship was returning from a plum blossom banquet at the palace when the ox pulling his carriage broke loose and injured an old man who happened to be passing by. The old fellow knelt and clasped his hands in prayerful thanks for having been caught on the horns of his lordship's own ox. So many stories about his lordship have been handed down. His Imperial Majesty himself once presented his lordship with 30 pure white horses on the occasion of a New Year's banquet. Another time, when construction of the Nagara Bridge seemed to be running counter to the will of the local deity, his lordship offered up a favorite boy attendant as a human sacrifice to be buried at the foot of a pillar. 5. And then there was the time when, to have a growth cut from his thigh, he summoned the Chinese monk who had brought the art of surgery to our country. Oh, there's no end to the tales. For sheer horror, though, none of them measures up to the story of the screen depicting scenes of hell which is now a prized family heirloom. Even his lordship, normally so imperturbable, was horrified by what happened, and those of us who waited upon him. Well, it goes without saying that we were shocked out of our minds. I myself had served as one of his lordship's men for a full 20 years, but what I witnessed then was more terrible than anything I had ever, or have ever, experienced. In order to tell you the story of the hell screen, however, I must first tell you about the painter who created it. His name was Yoshihide. 6. 2. I suspect that even now there are ladies and gentlemen who would recognize the name Yoshihide. He was famous back then as the greatest painter in the land, but he had reached the age of perhaps 50, and he looked like nothing more than a thoroughly unpleasant little old man, all skin and bones. He dressed normally enough for his appearances at his lordship's mansion, in a reddish-brown, broad-sleeved silk robe and a tall black hat with a soft bend to the right, but as a person he was anything but normal. You could see he had a mean streak, and his lips, unnaturally red for such an old man, gave a disturbing, bestial impression. Some people said the redness came from moistening his paintbrush with his lips, but I wonder about that. Cooler tongues used to say that he looked and moved like a monkey, and they went so far as to give Yoshihide the nickname Monkeyhide. 7. Ah, that nickname reminds me of a particular episode. Yoshihide had a daughter, his only child, a sweet, lovely girl of 15, utterly unlike her father. She had been taken into the Horikoa mansion as a junior lady-in-waiting for his lordship's own daughter, the young mistress. Perhaps because she lost her mother at a tender age, she had an unusually mature and deeply sympathetic nature and a cleverness beyond her years, and everyone from her ladyship on down loved the girl for her quickness to notice others' every need. Around that time someone from the province of Tamba presented his lordship with a tame monkey, and his lordship's son, the young master, who was then at the height of his boyish naughtiness, decided to name it Yoshihide. The monkey was a funny-looking little creature as it was, but capping it with that name gave everyone in the household a hearty laugh. Oh, if only they had been satisfied just to laugh. But whatever the monkey did, whether climbing to the top of a garden pine, or soiling the mats of a staff member's room, people would find a reason to torment it, and always with a shout of Yoshihide. Then one day, as Yoshihide's daughter was gliding down a long outdoor corridor to deliver a note gaily knotted on a branch of red winter plum, the monkey Yoshihide darted in through the sliding door at the far end, in full flight from something. The animal was running with a limp and seemed unable to escape up a post as it often did when frightened. Then he should appear chasing after it, but the young master, brandishing a switch and shouting, "Come back here, you tangerine thief, come back here." Yoshihide's daughter drew up short at the sight, and the monkey clung to her skirts with a pitiful cry. This must have aroused her compassion, for, still holding the plum branch in one hand, she swept the monkey up in the soft folds of her lavender sleeve. Then, giving a little bow to the young master, she said with cool clarity, "Forgive me for interfering, my young lord, but he is just an animal. Please pardon him." Temper still up from the chase, the young master scowled and stamped his foot several times. "Why are you protecting him?" he demanded. "He stole my tangerine. He is just an animal," she repeated. "He doesn't know any better." And then, smiling sadly, she added, "His name is Yoshihide, after all. I can't just stand by and watch my father being punished." This bold stroke was apparently enough to break the young master's will. "All right, then," he said with obvious reluctance. "If you're pleading for your father's life, I'll let him off this time." The young master flung his switch into the garden and stalked back out through the sliding door. 3. After this incident, Yoshihide's daughter and the little monkey grew close. The girl had a golden bell that her young mistress had given her, which she hung from the monkey's neck on a pretty crimson cord. And he, for his part, would almost never leave her side. Once, when she was in bed with a cold, The monkey spent hours by her pillow, biting its nails, and I swear it had a worried look on its face. People stopped teasing the monkey after that, strangely enough. In fact, they began treating it with special kindness, until even the young master would occasionally throw it a persimmon or a chestnut, and I heard he once flew into a rage when one of the samurai kicked the animal. Soon after that, his lordship himself ordered the girl to appear before him with the monkey in her arms. All because, in hearing about the young master's tantrum, I am told, he naturally also heard about how the girl had come to care for the monkey. I admire your filial behavior, his lordship said. Here, take this. And he presented her with a fine scarlet underrobe. They tell me that his lordship was especially pleased when the monkey, imitating the girl's expression of gratitude, bowed low before him, holding the robe aloft. And so his lordship's partiality for the girl was born entirely from his wish to commend her filial devotion to her father and not, as rumor had it, from any physical attraction he might have felt for her. Not that such suspicions were entirely groundless, but there will be time for me to tell you about that later. For now, suffice it to say that his lordship was not the sort of person to lavish his affections on the daughter of a mere painter, however beautiful she might be. Well, then, having been singled out for praise this way, Yoshihide's daughter withdrew from his lordship's presence, but she knew how to avoid provoking the envy of the household lover, less modest, ladies-in-waiting. Indeed, people grew fonder than ever of her and the monkey, and the young mistress almost never let them leave her side, even bringing them with her in her ox-drawn carriage when she went to observe shrine rituals and the like. But enough about the girl for now. Let me continue with my story of her father, Yoshihide. As I have said, the monkey Yoshihide quickly became everyone's little darling, but Yoshihide himself remained an object of universal scorn, reviled as monkeyhide by everyone behind his back. And not only in the Horikawa mansion. Even such an eminent Buddhist prelate as the abbot of Yokawa hated Yoshihide so much that the very mention of his name was enough to make him turn purple as if he had seen a devil. Some said this was because Yoshihide had drawn a caricature ridiculing certain aspects of the abbot's behavior, but this was merely a rumor that circulated among the lower classes and as such can hardly be credited. In any case, Yoshihide's reputation was so bad that anyone you asked would have told you the same thing. If there were those who spoke kindly of Yoshihide, they were either a handful of the Brotherhood of Painters or else people who knew his work but not the man himself. His appearance was not the only thing that people hated about Yoshihide. In fact, he had many evil traits that repelled them even more, and for which he had only himself to blame. For one thing, Yoshihide was a terrible miser. He was harsh in his dealings with people, he had no shame, he was lazy and greedy. But worst of all, he was insolent and arrogant. He never let you forget that he was the greatest painter in the land. Nor was his arrogance limited to painting. He could not be satisfied till he displayed his contempt for every custom and convention that ordinary people practiced. A man who was his apprentice for many years once told me this story. Yoshihide was present one day in the mansion of a certain gentleman when the celebrated shamaness of the Cypress enclosure was there, undergoing spirit possession. The woman delivered a horrifying message from the spirit, but Yoshihide was unimpressed. He took up a handy ink brush and did a detailed sketch of her wild expression as if he viewed spirit possession as mere trickery. No wonder, then, that such a man would commit acts of sacrilege in his work. In painting the lovely goddess Kishtim, he used the face of a common harlot, and to portray the mighty flame-draped deity Fud, his model was a criminal released to do chores in the magistrate's office. If you tried to warn him that he was flirting with danger, he would respond with feigned innocence. "I'm the one who painted them, after all," he would say. "Are you trying to tell me that my own Buddhas and gods are going to punish me?" Even his apprentices were shocked by this. I myself knew several of them who, fearing for their own punishment in the afterlife, wasted no time in leaving his employ. The man's arrogance simply knew no bounds. He was convinced that he was the greatest human being under heaven. It goes without saying that Yoshihide lorded it over the other painters of his time. True, his brushwork and colors were utterly different from theirs, and so the many painters with whom he was on bad terms tended to speak of him as a charlatan. They rhapsodized over the work of old masters such as Kawanari or Kanaroka 8. On moonlit nights you could actually smell the plum blossoms painted on that wooden door, or you could actually hear the courtier on that screen playing his flute. But all they had to say about Yoshihide's work was how eerie and unsettling they found it. Take his 5 levels of rebirth on the Rigaiji Temple Gate. For example, point 9, when I passed the gate late at night, one said, I could hear the dying celestials sighing and sobbing. That's nothing, another claimed. I could smell the flesh of the dead rotting. And how about the portraits of the household's ladies-in-waiting that his lordship ordered from Yoshihide? Every single woman he painted fell ill and died within 3 years. It was as if he had snatched their very souls from them. According to one of his harshest critics, this was the final proof that Yoshihide practiced the devil's art. But Yoshihide was so perverse, as I've said, that remarks like this only filled him with pride. When his lordship joked to him one time, "For you, it seems, the uglier the better," old Yoshihide's far too red lips spread in an eerie grin and he replied imperiously, "Yes, my lord, it's true. Other painters are such mediocrities, They cannot appreciate the beauty of ugliness. I must say, greatest painter in the land or not, it was incredible that he could spout such self-congratulatory nonsense in his lordship's presence. No wonder his apprentices called him Chira Aiju behind his back. You know, Chira Aiju, the long-nosed goblin who crossed over from China long ago to spread the sin of arrogance. But still, even Yoshihide, in all his incredible perversity. Yes, even Yoshihide displayed human tenderness when it came to one thing. 5. By this I mean that Yoshihide was truly mad about his only daughter, the young lady-in-waiting. The girl was, as I said before, a wonderfully kind-hearted young creature, deeply devoted to her father, and his love for her was no less strong than hers for him. I gather that he provided for her every need, every robe, every hair ornament, without the slightest objection. Don't you find this incredible for a man who had never made a single contribution to a temple? Yoshihide's love for his daughter, however, remained just that, love. It never occurred to him that he should be trying to find her a good husband someday. Far from it. He was not above hiring street thugs to beat up anyone who might make improper advances to her. So even when his lordship honored her with the position of junior Hoshino Tomoyuki, Pink. Translated by Brian Bergstrom. The 6th of August marked the start of the 9-day streak of blistering heat. Just after 1 in the afternoon, Tokyo registered 40 degrees Celsius. It was the highest temperature on record, and the heat kept rising, reaching 42.7 degrees 2 hours later. The humidity never dropped below 80% and the sky, though cloudless, was thick with a pale mist. Older people greeted each other, laughing, with lines like "Next week is the Bon Festival, but the dead might go back early, it's too hot even for them." Perhaps because age had numbed their senses, they seemed unbothered by the heat, and several of these very senior citizens were content to stand talking in the sunshine that beat down on Tokyo's Kakenoike Park. It seemed to Naomi, as she listened to 2 old biddies go on while she watched her niece play in the sandpit, that it might be a good idea if they thought about their own welfare rather than that of the dead. Or maybe they were the dead, having returned for Bon, but without realizing it they were chattering away thinking they were still alive. Though why the dead would want to come back to this prison called life, just because it was that time of year again, was beyond her. If I had the chance to end it all, muttered Naomi to herself, I'd leave this world in an instant and never look back. What was her problem? Why was she so irritated? She didn't even know these women. Why was she getting so carried away? It was the heat, the goddamn heat, and it was her goddamn stupid sister, who insisted that Naomi take her daughter outside to play at least once a day, for her health, even in this toxic weather. Why don't you take her outside? Thought Naomi, but she nonetheless did as her sister asked, the promise of 1,000 yen for her trouble pushing her out the door. Naomi's 2-year-old niece Pink, what a stupid name to give a kid, was absorbed with her playmates in some sort of sandpit public works project, and so, seeing that other mothers were keeping an eye on things, Naomi left the play area and walked over to the edge of the pond to have a smoke. There were no trees to filter the sunlight, which poured down from the yellow sun like sulfurous gas. Even the cicadas, whose tinny drone was usually inescapable, were silent. The hot air oozed with humidity, sticking to Naomi like a swarm of insects. It felt less as though she was sweating than that her skin was melting and running down her body. Everything around her seemed not entirely solid, a series of colors running together like so many abandoned scoops of ice cream. When the temperature gets high enough, even the landscape melts, thought Naomi. Little bodies began to fall one by one from above. They were birds, dropping down for a dip in the pond. They gathered at the edge, splashing themselves with water. Sparrows and white-eyes, starlings and baubles. There were so many of them. A few birds actually immersed themselves in the water. Ducks, Naomi thought, but when they broke the surface, she could see they were sparrows. She saw some dive straight into the water. Naomi counted the seconds. 1 or 2, and then, flapping their wings, the birds emerged and flew up into the sky. It wasn't just sparrows. The white-eyes, the baubles, the starlings, they all began to dive into the water, as if imitating the sparrows. At one point, the oversized body of a crow crashed into the water, causing the smaller birds to fly off. Only the pigeons, perhaps unable to dive, scuttled back and forth at the water's edge. The crow finally left, and the sparrows returned. They dived into the water again and again, twisting their bodies and spinning in the air. Had sparrows always been waterfowl? It began to seem so to Naomi. As they emerged from the pond, water spraying, the wet sparrows gleamed in the sun. Suddenly, in their midst, shiny things began to leap from the pond. They were fish. Similar in color and size to the sparrows, the fish were flying alongside the birds just above the surface of the water. Naomi crouched down and dipped a finger into the pond. As expected, the water was warm, too warm. The fish were suffering. They were throwing themselves into the air for the same reason the birds were plunging into the water. Seeming to follow the sparrow's lead, the fish twisted and somersaulted in the air. Were they trying to fan themselves? Birds have wings, humans have hands. Fish have only their bodies to twist and turn if they want to generate a breeze. Fish were jumping and twirling all across the surface of the pond. The pond was alive with the spray they produced, a silver mist that, carried by the hot wind, cooled Naomi's face. Naomi was gripped with a sudden joy. This place was a living hell. No creatures were dead, but they felt closer to death than the dead. Assaulted by such unbearable conditions, they longed to flee their existence. Birds wished to stop being birds and become fish. Fish longed to stop being fish and become birds. Cats wanted to be people. People longed to become anything but people. And so they all went crazy, flailing and flopping, spinning and twirling. But wasn't it fun too? To spin, to twirl? A crowd gathered to watch the leaping fish, but Naomi broke away from them and began twirling slowly by herself, arms outstretched like a ballerina. She spun clockwise as viewed from above, her body the axis of the clock, arms tracing a circle parallel to the ground. The soft breeze produced by her twirling touched the sweat on her skin, cooling it. Slowly, gently, so as not to get dizzy, she twirled her way back to the sandpit where Pink was playing. Naomi raised her head to look up, which gave her the illusion the sky was drawing closer, as if she were floating up into space as she spun. Spiraling like a drill or a shuttlecock, she bored her way upwards through the layers of air. To spin and spin until you moved like the wind itself. Would that make her a tornado? Well, nothing so strong as a tornado, a whirlwind. That's it, I'm a whirlwind. If she became a whirlwind, she'd stay cool. Light. She could fly. Naomi lost track of where her feet were carrying her. She brought her eyes down from the sky and stopped spinning. She was near the sandpit, and just about to run into a metal post. Now the heat pressed in on her from all sides, and sweat poured from her like water from a spring. She felt wobbly, and her head ached. She should never have done this. Once you start to twirl, you can't stop, because if you do, it'll be even worse than before you began. The only way out was to spin and spin forever. Naomi walked over to Pink, saying, "Time to go home," as she grabbed the child's hands. The moment she did this, she was struck by a feeling that something wasn't right. Naomi looked around, inspected Pink from head to toe, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that some unknown had been introduced into the world around her, something that created a subtle but inescapable dissonance. It was as if everything around her had been replaced by an exquisite fake. In order to collect herself, Naomi, still hand in hand with Pink, spread her arms to create a circle between them and began to spin with the child, singing softly, "Bird in the cage, bird in the cage." Pink danced happily even when her legs tangled up as they spun. Naomi didn't want Pink to get dizzy, so every few spins they would walk side by side for a bit until Pink said, "Let's play bird in the cage again." They'd reform the circle between them, repeating the pattern again and again until they reached home. Exhausted by the heat and the excitement, Pink fell asleep at once. Not long after, Naomi was asleep too. That evening, they watched the television news over dinner. It was all about the heat wave. Not only Tokyo but all of Japan had seen temperatures exceeding 40 degrees, with 392 people hospitalized and 56 dead, mostly elderly. But the story that really grabbed people's attention was that of a 17-year-old schoolgirl in Fukui who'd spun and spun under the blazing sun until she succumbed to heatstroke and died. According to friends who were with her, the girl had said, "Hey, what if we spin like fans? Wouldn't that cool us off?" And so she tried it, and it worked so well she invited her friends to join her. "Oh, it feels so good. Try it, try it." And they did, but soon, dizzy and nauseated, they lay down to rest, and after a while, the girl lay down beside them. When it came time to get up, she was still, and when they tried to rouse her they realized she was gone. A so-called expert compared her to someone trapped on the top floor of a burning high-rise choosing to jump out of a window rather than face the flames. It was a perfectly logical choice for that person, not abnormal in the least. Things are so fucking awful they're going to die either way. Let's not beat about the bush. Naomi carped at the television. "Could you not use that kind of language in front of Pink?" her sister objected. Murakami Haruki. UFO in Kushiro. Translated by J. Rubin. 5 straight days she spent in front of the television, staring at crumbled banks and hospitals, whole blocks of shops in flames, severed railway lines and motorways. She never said a word. Sunk deep in the cushions of the sofa, her mouth clamped shut, she wouldn't answer when Kimura spoke to her. She wouldn't shake her head or nod. Kimura could not be sure the sound of his voice was even getting through to her. Kimura's wife came from way up north in Yamagata, and, as far as he knew, she had no friends or relatives who could have been hurt in Kobe. 1, yet she stayed rooted in front of the television from morning to night. In his presence, at least, she ate nothing and drank nothing and never went to the toilet. Aside from an occasional flick of the remote control to change the channel, she hardly moved a muscle. Kimura would make his own toast and coffee, and head off to work. When he came home in the evening, he'd fix himself a snack with whatever he found in the fridge and eat alone. She'd still be glaring at the late news when he dropped off to sleep. A stone wall of silence surrounded her. Kimura gave up trying to break through. When he came home from work on Sunday, the 6th day, his wife had disappeared. Kimura was a salesman at one of the oldest audio equipment specialty stores in Tokyo's Akihabara electronics town. He handled top-of-the-line stuff and earned a sizable commission whenever he made a sale. Most of his clients were doctors, wealthy independent businessmen and rich provincials. He had been doing this for 8 years and had a decent income right from the start. The economy was healthy, property prices were rising and Japan was overflowing with money. People's wallets were bursting with 10,000 yen bills, and everyone was dying to spend them. The most expensive items were the first to sell out. Kimura was tall and slim and a stylish dresser. He was good with people. In his bachelor days he had dated a lot of women. But after getting married, at 26, he found that his desire for sexual adventures simply, and mysteriously, vanished. He hadn't slept with any woman but his wife during the 5 years of their marriage. Not that the opportunity had never presented itself, but he had lost all interest in fleeting affairs and one-night stands. He much preferred to come home early, have a relaxed meal with his wife, talk with her for a while on the sofa, then go to bed and make love. This was everything he wanted. Kimura's friends and colleagues were puzzled by his marriage. Alongside him with his clean, classic good looks, his wife could not have seemed more ordinary. She was short with thick arms, and she had a dull, even stolid, appearance. And it wasn't just physical. There was nothing attractive about her personality, either. She rarely spoke and always wore a sullen expression. Still, though he did not quite understand why, Kimura always felt his tension dissipate when he and his wife were together under one roof. It was the only time he could truly relax. He slept well with her, undisturbed by the strange dreams that had troubled him in the past. His erections were hard, his sex life was warm. He no longer had to worry about death or venereal disease or the vastness of the universe. His wife, on the other hand, disliked Tokyo's crowds and longed for Yamagata. She missed her parents and her 2 elder sisters, and she would go home to see them whenever she felt the need. Her parents ran a successful inn, which kept them financially comfortable. Her father was crazy about his youngest daughter and happily paid her return fares. Several times, Kimura had come home from work to find his wife gone and a note on the kitchen table telling him that she would be visiting her parents for a while. He never objected. He just waited for her to come back, and she always did, after a week or 10 days, in a good mood. But the letter his wife left for him when she vanished 5 days after the earthquake was different. "I am never coming back," she had written, then went on to explain, simply but clearly, why she no longer wanted to live with him. "The problem is that you never give me anything," she wrote. "Or, to put it more precisely, you have nothing inside you that you can give me. You are good and kind and handsome, but living with you is like living with a chunk of air. It's not your fault, though. There are lots of women who will fall in love with you. But please don't call me. Just get rid of all the stuff I'm leaving behind." In fact, she hadn't left much of anything behind. Her clothes, her shoes, her umbrella, her coffee mug, her hairdryer, all were gone. She must have packed them in boxes and shipped them out after he left for work that morning. The only things still in the house that could be called her stuff were the bike she used for shopping and a few books. The Beatles and Bill Evans CDs that Kimura had been collecting since his bachelor days had also vanished. The next day, he tried calling his wife's parents in Yamagata. His mother-in-law answered the phone and told him that his wife didn't want to talk to him. She sounded somewhat apologetic. She also told him that they would be sending him the necessary forms soon and that he should put his seal on them and send them back right away. Kimura answered that he might not be able to send them right away. This was an important matter, and he wanted time to think it over. "You can think it over all you want, but I know it won't change anything," his mother-in-law said. She was probably right, Kimura told himself. No matter how much he thought or waited, things would never be the same. He was sure of that. Shortly after he had sent the papers back with his seal stamped on them, Kimura asked for a week's paid leave. His boss had a general idea of what had been happening, and February was a slow time of the year, so he let Kimura go without a fuss. He seemed on the verge of saying something to Kimura, but finally said nothing. Suzuki, a colleague of Kimura's, came over to him at lunch and said, "I hear you're taking time off. Are you planning to do something?" "I don't know," Kimura said. "What should I do?" Suzuki was a bachelor, 3 years younger than Kimura. He had a delicate build and short hair, and he wore round, gold-rimmed glasses. A lot of people thought he talked too much and had a rather arrogant air, but he got along well enough with the easygoing Kimura. "What the hell, as long as you're taking the time off, why not make a nice trip out of it?" "Not a bad idea," Kimura said. Wiping his glasses with his handkerchief, Suzuki peered at Kimura as if looking for some kind of clue. "Have you ever been to Hokkaido?" he asked. "Never," Kimura said. "Would you like to go?" "Why do you ask?" Suzuki narrowed his eyes and cleared his throat. "To tell you the truth, I've got a small package I'd like to send to Kushiro, and I'm hoping you'll take it there for me. You'd be doing me a big favor, and I'd be glad to pay for the return airfare. I could cover your hotel in Kushiro, too." "A small package? Like this," Suzuki said, shaping a 4-inch cube with his hands. Nothing heavy. Something to do with work. Sasaki shook his head. Not at all, he said. Strictly personal. I just don't want it to get knocked around, which is why I can't mail it. I'd like somebody I know to deliver it by hand, if possible. I really ought to do it myself, but I haven't been able to find the time to fly all the way to Hokkaido. Is it something important? His closed lips curling slightly, Sasaki nodded. It's nothing fragile, and there are no hazardous materials. There's no need to worry about it. They're not going to stop you when they x-ray it at the airport. I promise I'm not going to get you into trouble. And it weighs practically nothing. All I'm asking is that you take it along just as you take anything else. The only reason I'm not mailing it is I just don't feel like mailing it. Hokkaido in February would be freezing cold, Kimura knew, but, cold or hot, it was all the same to him. So who do I give the package to? My sister. My younger sister. She lives up there. Kimura decided to accept Sasaki's offer. He hadn't thought about how to spend his week off, and making plans now would have been too much trouble. Besides, he had no reason for not wanting to go to Hokkaido. Sasaki called the airline then and there, reserving a ticket to Kushiro. The flight would leave 2 days later, in the afternoon. At work the next day, Sasaki handed Kimura a box like the ones used for human ashes, only smaller, wrapped in brown paper. Judging from the feel, it was made of wood. As Sasaki had said, it weighed practically nothing. Broad strips of clear adhesive tape went all around the package over the paper. Kimura held it in his hands and studied it a few seconds. He gave it a little shake, but he couldn't feel or hear anything moving inside. My sister will pick you up at the airport. And she'll be arranging a room for you, Sasaki said. All you have to do is stand outside the gate with the package in your hands where she can see it. Don't worry, the airport's not very big. Kimura left home with the box in his suitcase, wrapped in a thick thermal undershirt. The plane was far more crowded than he had expected. Why were all these people going from Tokyo to Kushiro in the middle of winter? He wondered. The morning paper was full of earthquake reports. He read it from beginning to end on the plane. The number of dead was rising. Many areas were still without water or electricity, and countless people had lost their homes. Each article reported some new tragedy, but to Kimura the details seemed oddly lacking in depth. All sounds reached him as far-off, monotonous echoes. The only thing he could give any serious thought to was his wife as she retreated ever further into the distance. Mechanically he ran his eyes over the earthquake reports, stopped now and then to think about his wife, then went back to the paper. When he grew tired of this, he closed his eyes and napped. And when he woke, he thought about his wife again. Why had she followed the TV earthquake reports with such intensity, from morning to night, without eating or sleeping? What could she have seen in them? 2 young women wearing overcoats of similar design and color approached Kimura at the airport. One was fair-skinned and maybe 5'6", with short hair. The area from her nose to her full upper lip was oddly extended in a way that made Kimura think of short-haired undulates. Her companion was more like 5'1" and would have been quite pretty if her nose hadn't been so small. Her long hair fell straight to her shoulders. Her ears were exposed, and there were 2 moles on her right earlobe which were emphasized by the earrings she wore. Both women looked to be in their mid-20s. They took Kimura to a cafe in the airport. I'm Sasaki Keiko, the taller woman said. My brother told me how helpful you've been to him. This is my friend Shimao. Nice to meet you, Kimura said. Hi, Shimao said. My brother tells me your wife recently passed away, Sasaki Keiko said with a respectful expression. Kimura waited a moment before. Satya. Same as always. Translated by Rachel Dianato. 1. Every time I saw it on the news it was a mystery to me. What kind of environment allowed for such a thing to happen? How could a mother get away with hitting a baby hard enough to bruise it or break its bones? Surely her husband would notice. Even if he were in on it, someone in the neighborhood would notice, or a relative or a public official. I couldn't think of an environment in which you could get away with beating a baby to a pulp. People paid attention to and took even better care of babies than I had imagined. I lived in an apartment with my husband, and with this blob that could only be called a baby, though at first glance you couldn't make out its face or sex. My mother-in-law would drop in all the time to see it. My parents pestered me to send them photos of their grandchild almost every day, and the apartment manager would peek into the pushchair and go on about how cute it was. The whole world loves babies. How could you possibly find a chance to abuse one? I guess you could always shut everything out, lock the door, unplug the phone, close the curtains and beat the child to your heart's content, or at least until someone broke the door down. But in the end, you'd be caught. A little crying at night was all it took to be reported to the police. You'd be arrested, and your name and the dead babies would be all over the news. I couldn't take that. What about those parents who beat their babies to death? What the hell were they thinking? All I could figure was they had no imagination. It was different from bullying someone at school. You needed a plan if you were going to attack something as fragile as a baby. But I could never hit a baby. Not because I'd feel sorry for it or because people weren't supposed to do things like that. It was for the same reason that I couldn't kill a bug. I hate bugs, but I can't kill them. When you killed one, even if you got it with a tissue or used a rolled up newspaper, there was no way to avoid that squishing sensation in your hand. If you killed it in the house, you had to clean it up, the ooze and broken body parts. For that reason, I gave up killing bugs. I hate them, but I'm through with killing them. Given how traumatic it was for me to kill a bug, I knew I could never hit a child. I knew from the start that I couldn't bear the sensation of each punch or stand the sight of their messy, injured bodies. You could starve a child to death, but that wasn't an option for me either. Just the idea of an emaciated baby gave me the creeps. I got sick thinking about a thing like that hanging around the house. There were other methods, like letting them die from neglect, never changing their nappy or bathing them, but I couldn't do that either. It would bother me long before the baby would mind. But even if my fastidiousness and aversion somehow disappeared, leaving me free to hit a baby, as I said before, society wouldn't let me get away with it. If I did happen to hurt the baby even a little, the evidence would be immediately found on its body, and I'd be arrested. What about those parents who were in fact arrested? Their environment must have been exactly right for them to get away with beating the baby to death. But in my case, my husband came home from the office like clockwork and loved me and the baby. Our relatives and even the apartment manager loved the baby. I loved everyone except the baby and didn't want to betray any of them. That's why I was relieved when I heard about the spread of the radiation. 2. I wasn't troubled at all when I saw the news about the huge earthquake and the explosion at the nuclear power plant that spewed radiation. The quake was fantastic, but after it passed, that was the end of it. The nuclear power plant was far enough away from where I lived that I felt little urgency. But everyone was making a big deal out of it. When I took the baby for a walk the next day, there was hardly a soul about. Everyone was afraid to go outside because of the radiation. My usual pharmacy was closed due to the disaster, so I headed towards one of the chain stores near the train station. The streets were so quiet, it was the first time I'd ever heard the wheels spinning on the pushchair. I'd only gone a few hundred meters from my apartment, an area as familiar as my own garden, when I was seized by a sense of disorientation, like a child lost in an unknown place. It struck me that there should be others here at this time of day, not just a full-time housewife like me. The issue of food safety came to the fore soon after the accident at the plant. When my husband saw the extensive news coverage of contaminated vegetables on the TV that night, he remarked on how terrible it was. "I know," I said as I spooned baby food into the child's mouth. It fussed as the food ran down its face. But the minute I heard the news, a deep feeling of relief ran through me, as if someone had assured me that everything would be okay. It's hard to put into words, but I felt encouragement spreading through my body. I didn't understand it at first myself. How could I feel this way when a foreign substance was covering the earth and contaminating the very food we put into our mouths? Only when I was boiling water to sterilize the baby's bottles did I realize the origins of my newfound ease. When the news reports warned us not to give tap water to infants, I embraced this new sense of security. 3. Spinach, lotus root, napa cabbage, watercress, sweet potatoes, mizuna, mustard greens. I went to a few different supermarkets, carefully choosing those vegetables we'd been warned to avoid, the ones with high radiation levels. I hurried home, the carrier bags stuffed with contaminated vegetables hanging from the hook on the pushchair, the baby sound asleep. My baby loves to go for walks, falling asleep as soon as I put it in the pushchair. I got home, put the baby in the cot and headed into the kitchen. I threw away what baby food there was in the freezer. I heated the spinach and mustard greens in the microwave, added tap water, and browned them up. I flavored the spinach paste and divided it up into small plastic bags. I accomplished all this without a tinge of emotion. Then I heard a cry from the bedroom. The baby was sobbing, flailing its short arms and legs. I was filled with sadness and pity at the sight of this baby, its face bright red, its body writhing, eyelids full of tears. I don't know if you call this maternal instinct. I put the nursing cushion on my lap and pushed the baby's face to my breast. The round lump clamped on and sucked with tremendous force.